thank you everyone that is able to join us on time. I just gonna ask everyone to mute. Yes, everyone can just mute themselves. Just out of, courtesy and consideration with everyone participating and presenting today. My name is Michelle, and I am an executive assistant at TQ Construction. So thank you again for joining us. I do want to note that this webinar is being recorded, and you will be receiving a copy. When we are finished after here. So please look out for an email within the next day or two. You will be able to review, go over some of the things that we will be going over today. So just wanted to let you know about that. We do ask everyone to please stay muted until the end of our webinar presentation. We will have a Q&A session. Feel free to have any questions along the way and place them into the chat below. And yes, and so we do look forward to answering some questions of yours tonight. And we will get started. We will have Megan present, and Megan is our project relations and our host for tonight. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle. Just switch on my mouse here so that maybe, here we go. So yeah, so like Michelle said, today's topic is decoding design documentation. So what I'm going to go over today is a bunch of samples of documents, particularly drawings, and kind of go over some key sort of items, both on like things to look out for in terms of how they relate to each other and what kind of information to be able to pull from them. As we're going through, like Michelle said, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat or make a note of them and ask them at the end. If necessary, we can go back to the slide to be able to point out if there's a specific thing that you have a question with regards to. The main thing that we wanted to kind of be able to talk about today was kind of in our experience as we're kind of going through the process of introducing clients to the design documentation and going through the drawings. There's often a little bit of a learning curve, understandably so. So that's kind of the goal of today's presentation. So today's topics, or the pieces that we're going to go over today, is the first one is documentation hierarchy in terms of like how everything relates to each other and what reigns over what, so to speak. And then we'll kind of go through a series of examples. We'll go through an example of like what a site plan looks like. We'll go through what floor plans look like, exterior elevations, some interior design stuff, the difference kind of between interior design details and construction details, and then how material selections can be represented, and then kind of talk about like what's the difference between a bunch of different kinds of drawing sets and what kind of information you're really looking to get from each of those kinds of drawing sets, which we'll kind of get into then as well. So documentation hierarchy, this particular slide is a little bit more of a bit by bit and going through it all, but it is really important because it goes through, dimensions that are annotated on a drawing are more important than what you can scale off of it. So a drawing has a scale where, maybe 1/4 of an inch is equal to a foot or something like that. And so it's important to kind of keep in mind that whatever's actually written on the drawings, because sometimes your printing is off, is so that what you can scale is not as accurate as what is listed on the drawing. It's assumed that if it says it's 2 feet, that's what it is. And then anything that's more blown up is considered to reign over something that's more zoomed out. So if you have a floor plan of your whole main level, and then you have another plan where it's like just, for example, your kitchen that's blown up with all of your cabinetry sort of stuff, then it's assumed that all of the details that are on that blown up drawing are more accurate than the floor plan drawing because it's been given more attention to detail. Material and finishing schedules are supposed to be more more accurate than your specifications. So as you go through and you make all your selections, and then we'll create like schedules for like windows and doors and other important things that end up on like your drawings and your permit sets and things like that. And those are considered to be more accurate than your specification drawings or your specification documentation, where you're going through and selecting your materials. And then your specifications are considered to be more accurate than like large scale drawings, where like zoomed out drawings, where all of your details have been selected out and specifically listed. And then it kind of goes in where like, you know, your elevation drawings are considered to be more accurate than your plan drawings of the same scale. And again, that's due to like the amount of, at each level, we add more detail, and there's a certain amount of attention to detail that's added at each of those steps. So for example, if you have like a window on a plan drawing versus on an elevation drawing, and an elevation drawing, which we'll see an example of, is basically either like the inside of a wall, like if there was a plan drawn up of what this wall behind me here looks like, versus like the plan of it, which is just like a floor plan. There's obviously going to be a lot more detail in terms of, you know, where this door is specifically sitting and where that window in that door is and at what height. And then obviously like the last one is date. So things that are newer are considered to be more accurate than things that are older, because, you know, if decisions are made and changed. And all of that being that, you know, especially once you kind of get into the point where you've got like an official set, everything obviously needs to be signed off on by the decision-making parties, whoever those might be, which usually are like someone from whoever you're working with, like a representative of your contractor or your designer who signs off on that behalf, and then also the client who signs off. So either a representative of the group of people as a whole, especially when we get into like multi-generational situations, or but like anyone who's on title for the house or property. So a little thing before we really get into a site plan. So these are all like taken from a legitimate set that we've used and built a house off of. We submitted for a permit with them and all of that. So I just kind of wanted to go over, this is what we call a title block. So kind of ignoring all of the information in the center and focusing on the information kind of more along the outsides and how everything is laid out. So this particular one is a cover page of a permit set and has a bunch of really detailed information, which isn't as pertinent here, but I left it on this sample so that you could kind of see it and see what you would expect to see. But the things that are really kind of more important on a drawing like this is it'll say which thing you're looking at. So in this case, it's a site plan. If it was a floor plan, it would say the floor plan of like, you know, the upper level or the main level or the basement, or it would say, you know, north side elevation, something like that. Because it's really difficult to see the actual drawings, I actually moved away from title blocks for the rest of the samples. So this is kind of the only time that we look at that. You also see kind of your page numbers as well as the date that the drawing was created. And again, jumping back to that hierarchy thing, the date is really important, and in being able to kind of, because you're going to see multiple versions of things as you go through the process. So it's really important to be able to see that. You'll also like have usually an address of some kind that, or project name that allows you to identify that, yes, this is indeed a part of my project. And then you'll also see like up at the very top here, that's frankly too small for us to read, but you'll see like the number of revisions that have been done and a very brief description of the scope of work of what was changed in each of those revisions. And then often a company will have like some sort of logo somewhere on their title block, and that's that. Sometimes you'll have like a set scale throughout a set of drawings, and you'll see that on the title block. In our case, we actually include that as a part of the drawings themselves, because different drawings will show up at a different scale. So site plans will show up at a more zoomed out scale, and floor plans will show up at a more zoomed in scale. So instead of putting it in our title block where it would be more of a pain for us to go in and change it on every single one just because of how it's set up, we do it on the drawings. And that way also, if there's two drawings on the same page with different scales, it's easy for us to change that as well. So that's a title block, and there's a lot of important information on there to be able to pull out of that, especially as you're going through different renditions and being able to kind of center yourself on what version you're looking at. And then zooming into a site plan. So a site plan will show, again, normally a site plan would show the address and like what your streets are intersecting. For obvious privacy reasons, we've removed them from this sample. So, there was, whatever the street names were on here. And then also you would normally have the address of the home on there as well, so that you can easily, whoever's reviewing the plans can easily see like where the house is located. And then you basically see how like all the buildings are arranged on the site plan and everything that's a part of that. You'll also start to see like things like where the setbacks are of where your building is allowed to be on the property, if there's any kind of like landscaping requirements, and things like that. You'll also notice that there's like tree protection on there. So this particular site plan was taken from a permit set. And so those are kinds of things that you'll want to see on a permit set, which is where you have to protect things, where your building is allowed to be within, and then furthermore, where your building actually exists from there. Because not every home is built to every itty bitty maximum, because sometimes it's not possible because certain bylaws will conflict with each other. And then moving into floor plans. So you'll see multiple variations of this. Typically, they will start out a lot simpler than the ones that you're seeing here. These ones are like fully fleshed out. So typically you would see ones with a lot fewer dimensions initially, and things like your cabinetry would be a lot less detailed and things like that. And then as you move through the process, it becomes a lot more detailed as those details get fleshed out and decided on. But you would start with, your walls and the approximate locations of things. And like, this is where we're thinking about putting our countertops and our cabinetry. This is where we're thinking about having our stairs and what direction they go in, and things like that. Things that our design team often wants to bring attention to are things that we don't necessarily get to choose whether or not we do. So there's, and I'd like to dive into that a little bit more in the future, not necessarily today. But one of the things that our design team comes up against is sharing with people, no, a door does have to be a certain width, or it needs to be offset from something a certain amount in order to allow for it to open, and things like that. And this is often the point where we're helping a lot of clients understand what those restrictions would be, or how many windows you can have on the side of the house, and things like that. You'll also see, as you go through the process, you'll see different legends show up on your drawings of what the different symbols mean. For example, like a square with an F in it often means fan. You'll see things for like smoke detectors, and carbon monoxide detectors, and those are all things that are required by your local municipality and the bylaw for fire safety. And so those are all kinds of things that start to show up on your floor plans as you go through and get closer to being ready to submit for a permit or ready to start construction, depending on whether your project requires a permit or not. You'll also see legends that will show where your new walls are, where walls are being removed, what walls are staying existing and not being changed. And so this is also where you receive that kind of information as well. These are typically what exterior elevations look like. So in this case, I've included like a an existing and then a proposed, so that you can kind of see like what the differences are. Um, in this particular case, we did a house lift. So you'll notice that there's, for example, there's a lot more stairs over here. Um, and that these windows are a little bit more lifted from the ground. The types of information that you'll really start to get from drawings like this, not necessarily your existing. You'll get where the existing door locations and window locations are. You won't necessarily always get what the existing finishes are. You'll get something representational that's kind of close to. But then as you move through, you'll start to see a more accurate representation of what your roof material might be, and it'll be annotated on your drawings. What kind of material you're supposed to have around your stairs, what your windows should look like. They should be pretty similar to whatever you've selected. So you can get a clearer picture of what your home is going to look like as you move through the process. You'll also see with the elevations so that you can see how tall things are going to be and be able to kind of see proportionally, like if you do a house lift or if you do an addition, how that affects your home's overall stature, I suppose. As well as, you know, if you're going from like an 8-foot ceiling to a 9-foot ceiling or a 10-foot ceiling, and what that kind of looks like as well. If you're kind of deliberating different choices and different options. And then the interior design details are very similar to either blown up floor plans or, you know, interior elevations where, see, in this case, it shows where all of the windows are, where the cabinetry is on this wall. It's noted how it's supposed to open. These all happen to be drawers that are pulling out. If they were doors, they would annotate their door swings. It shows how the tile is meant to be laid out. For this project, there was also really specific floor plans that we had to do for the bathroom tile layouts in one bathroom, where we had to annotate where the colored accent tiles would be in order to create the specific pattern that was specified between the design team and the client. So those kinds of things fall into your interior design details. And at each level, you get into a greater detail of what's going to be included and how things are supposed to operate. And as you get into each of those details and each of those levels, that's where you're kind of paying more attention to those things, where you might meet with your designer for the first time back when you're doing floor plans, and you might say, okay, well, I want open shelving over here, and that wouldn't necessarily show up at that point, but it would start to show up at this point when you start producing those drawings and that documentation that goes along with that. And that's kind of where you're wanting to make sure that the scope of work that you're wanting is accurately represented in the documentation that is being produced and that you will eventually sign off on prior to construction. And then this is more of an example of like construction details in terms of, and this is more something where the construction team is looking for specific details in terms of how for them to execute their work. So this is showing, you know, walls that they'll be demoing, walls that they'll be putting new walls into, so you can see what was being removed, what was pre-existing here, and that's these light dashed lines. And then what's new is these lines that have been hatched in. And so that shows the guys or the team where they're supposed to be removing things, if things are supposed to be getting saved so that they can either be reinstalled later or be kept in place, and things like that. As well as showing, you know, if there's going to be a skylight that needs to be framed in certain areas, and all of those fun kinds of details. Now, as we've been going through, you may have noticed that all the drawings have what we call grid lines on them. So they'll have this one's kind of set on its side, but you'll notice that it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, E. And so those are always in the same place on each drawing that you see. So if I back up um, to a floor plan, it's the same place, it's the same intersection on each drawing between like the floor plans and then wherever they show up on any given drawing. And that's really helpful both to our teams as well as to clients, because as you're looking at different floor plans and trying to figure out like what lines up where, especially when different floor plans aren't necessarily always the same size, um, it allows you to be like, oh, okay, so how does my bathroom line up on the upper floor with the lower floor, and what does that look like if we move it around? Which often plays a much bigger part in renovations than it does in a new home because you're building a new structure. Kind of you have a little bit more freedom to kind of place a lot of things wherever you want, but it also helps when you start getting into kind of structural things and trying to figure out where kind of your lines are drawn and how your structure has been laid out by your team, so you can kind of get a better idea why there might be certain constraints around certain design aspects because the building requires it and needs it. You'll also see it in where you see like ceiling drawings, so like floor plans, but of your ceiling, reflected ceiling plans, to see where all your lights are and things like that. So, and any kind of mechanical drawings as well, where you might start to see plans that are more stripped down and have less details that you're familiar with on a floor plan, and be able to kind of draw the lines and understand how they relate to each other a little bit more, which is really, I find a lot of people are very interested in it and find it very helpful in understanding how their home works. And then the last thing that we're going to kind of look at today, in terms of a sample, is what material selections might potentially look like. So this is how we do it, but the main kind of thing is having something where you've got, okay, what it is. So for example, a fridge, having something that determines where it is. So in the kitchen, um, whether or not it's been officially selected or not. So if this was not selected, then for us personally, it would be highlighted so that it brings attention. Okay, we need to make sure that we finalize this selection so that it's ready to go and we know that we can order it and that the client has indeed approved it, which is key. And then kind of, how many are we ordering? What is the size of it? And then also including what the details are of it. So what the unit number is, and what is it. And then also we like to include a link so that we know where to find all the specification information, both for us interest wise in terms of like, dimensions and a bunch of other stuff, where to order it, what the warranty information is on it. But then also it's really great because then that's often where all of the things for installation are and all of that. We don't get as much paper anymore with deliveries. That and paper often gets lost and shredded up on construction sites. So having a really easy place to be able to go and just like click on a link and there's all the information that we need about it is super helpful, and really beneficial as you move through your process, because these are also, these are representational images. They are of the actual items, but they are also quite small. So as you're going through and reviewing your own documentation, you might have been going back and forth between two fridges. And so you might want to go back and double check that this is indeed the fridge that you landed on and that this is the one you wanted. And you might want to double check with your design team as to why you may have landed on that decision, because decisions get bounced around a lot. So then kind of going into, this is the last thing that we're going to go over today in general, but kind of the information that ends up on different drawing sets. So permit sets, are things that you're submitting to the city. That includes like your development department information, which will have to do with if you're submitting for a development permit. That's usually if you're changing the use of your property in some kind of way. So for example, the buzz topic these days is the multiplexes. So for example, if you were building a multiplex on your property, you would need to submit for a development permit first, and then you would submit for a building permit second. And then the building permit is like the actual structure that's going on the lot of land. And then you would have like your landscaping department information, which is like all your arborist stuff, any kind of engineering department information, which often has to do with the city engineering, which is not necessarily the same as your building engineering. That's a part of your building department, and things like that. So it's all of the stuff that the city would request, which sometimes feels like a lot. And then the architectural sets are the sets that we tend to get a lot more invested in and tend to be a lot more detail oriented, that have, you know, your general design, your general floor plan, your layout, all of the construction details that help your team go through and successfully build your project and have you end up with the project that you're wanting to end up with. And then all of your interior and exterior design and elevation sort of stuff. So all of the minute details of how everything's going to lay out, how is everything opening, where exactly are the windows on the wall / the building to make sure that everything lines up and looks the way you want it to. Assembly, which is, you know, what your walls are made out of, what your roof is made out of, layouts in general, which can be also like your mechanical and stuff like that. And so these things all relate to each other. And then you have your consultant sets. And the obvious one is like structural. You have to get a structural drawing for almost any project where you're making massive changes. But then also if you're doing any kind of like, say you're upgrading your heating and cooling for your home, you might need like a mechanical set that shows where all of the ducting is going to go and things like that. Electrical, where it shows where the wiring is going to go and where it's going to get pulled from, how many switches are you going to have. And so those are specific sets for specific consultants that get produced by those consultants that then get integrated as a part of both your permit sets and your architectural sets. And they all lean on each other and they all relate to each other. So that was that. That was like a quick overview of everything, between, you know, the documentation hierarchy and then all of the different types of plans that we typically see. Obviously, we went through a sliver of samples of all of these things, and then also just kind of like how they all typically relate to each other and how they build off of each other. And then in the future, I think mid-July, we're hoping to kind of get into how they get developed a little bit more closely, how the detail builds from kind of that initial phase where you're sitting down with people and then kind of going through that process. So we're hoping to go through that in July. But that's everything that we have for you today. So if anybody has any questions or anything, now is definitely the time. If they're interested, you can either raise your hand, your metaphorical hand, and we'll get you to unmute, or you're welcome to post a question in the chat. I can't see though. Are there any questions? I don't see any.
I don't see any at this moment either.
Okay. That being said, though, if anybody wants to reach out and contact us, they're more than welcome to. I often will speak with people kind of on a one-on-one basis based on their project and what they're wanting to do and explore. And I'm happy to have a phone conversation or set up an in-person meeting or a one-on-one video call. Any of those things are definitely an option, and I'm happy to do those.
We do have a question, Megan.
Perfect.
A question from Isabella Rob. Which software do we use for the drawings?
So we're using both AutoCAD and Revit right now for the drawings. So a lot of professionals use AutoCAD and so do we. But a lot of structural engineers use AutoCAD and a lot of the consultants use AutoCAD. So we do maintain use of AutoCAD. But we have started to also use Revit over the last few years just because it is so diverse in being able to like for example, one of the things we didn't pull up today was like a 3D model and a 3D rendering. And the nice thing about Revit is that it will auto generate that for us to varying degrees of detail depending on how much detail we ask it to spit out. And then we can, again, depending on how much detail we ask it to spit out, we can get it to look pretty reasonably accurate, depending on like the materials that have been selected. Versus with AutoCAD, it's not as simple. You have to extrude it. It's a little bit more work. You have to extrude it and then kind of attach everything. So we do use both.
Any other questions from anyone? Feel free to share. Thank you for asking that question, Isabel Robb. You're welcome. Happy that Megan was able to clarify that. And I guess if we don't have any more questions, we can probably wrap up for today's session. And as mentioned earlier, oh, there's another question. Uh, we have do we collaborate with each other?
Um,
And then there is another question too.
okay, perfect. I'm just thinking about the best way to answer that. So how do we collaborate with each other? So to me, the best way to answer that question is typically we collaborate in person. But we will also set up um like virtual meetings is one kind of portion of that answer. I'm feeling like it's kind of a bit of a multifaceted sort of question though. And
Mhm,
so what I think of as like collaborating with each other is kind of a bit in a part of our process and how we kind of move forward with that. So how we handle that is a lot of like in person and getting to know each other and being able to kind of get to figuring out what an individual client's needs are. Um, so a lot of that is when I'm going through and having first initial meetings with potential clients and having initial conversations about, what their issues are with their existing space, and what they're wanting to get out of a new space, which is honestly both extremely valid, regardless of whether you're renovating or building new. And then past that point, it's introducing to the design team, getting like basis plans done up if you're doing a renovation that's based on like existing, or starting fresh with new floor plans based on the needs that have been expressed to us and kind of getting to know each other a little bit there. And then from that point, it's really the big one is open communication. And so if you see something that you really like, definitely tell us. Also, if you see something that doesn't really vibe with what you're wanting to see, you also need to tell us because it's a process of getting to know each other like any other relationship. And so sometimes it's a matter of even just like throwing things out there to kind of get an idea from people as to what they're really liking. Some people are really clear about what they want and what they like and what they want to see, and they're really great about communicating that, which is fantastic. And then some people are less sure about what they want and they need a little bit more of a discovery process, which is also totally fine and fantastic and a lot of fun. Um, and in that case, there's a little bit more
mhm.
discovery and throwing things out there to try and figure it out. And then as that gets honed and that communication line is open, things become more clear and more defined as you move through the process. And so there's a lot of communication back and forth, emails, in-person meetings, papers, like drawings on like 12 inches by 18 inches and us kind of like drawing and doodling all over them so that we can kind of start honing in and then sending revised stuff. So it's a cyclical thing. Did that
Mhm.
answer your question? I hope.
I think Utante, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. I guess maybe collaborative with like professionals and careers type of thing. And we do have another question that kind of ties in similarly,
Yeah.
right? For instance, in which cases do we need to, when do we consult with building scientists, specialists? For example, the envelope design.
Yeah. So tying in with that, we do manage all of that. So we have a number of professionals that we work with on a regular basis, and we reach out to them at the appropriate times. So, for example, um, with building consultants and structural engineers, we don't necessarily reach out to them right at the very beginning because they want to have an idea of what our end goal is. So our team is very experienced in working with homes of different layouts, and we have a pretty general decent understanding of structures and how they work. We're not structural engineers, but we're pretty decent at like pointing out in a home, okay, this is probably a structural wall. So if we're going to do something here, we just need to keep in mind that we're going to have to do something to support it, for example. And then when it comes time to reach out to a structural engineer, which is around the time that we've gotten to a floor plan that we are comfortable with and happy with, and that we definitely want to move forward with, at that point, we reach out to the structural engineer, we send them the plans, and we ask them to look it over. And then they give us something back, and we go back and forth if necessary. And the same thing goes for other professionals as well, whether they're energy consultants or arborists or anything along those lines, your building consultants, you're going to reach out to them once you have a more clear idea in terms of what your scope is and things are a little bit more fleshed out. And then they can help you hone in on the details and ask any questions that might really affect the design, and small things might need to get moved around. And a lot of those consultants you want to deal with once you have a floor plan that you're pretty comfortable with, and you're kind of ramping up and getting ready to move towards like prepping for a building permit or prepping for construction.
Don't yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I don't think there's any more questions. Last seconds. If, as mentioned by Megan, if you do have any questions or want to follow up, feel free to connect with us, and Megan can happily connect with you with a phone call or video call. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it for tonight.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much to everyone for attending and taking the time. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you the next one in July.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank,
Have a good night
thank you
now.
so much. This was amazing. Thank you.
Of
Um,
course. Thank you so much.
Have a great
Love
day. Okay.